Okay. Yes. Good evening. This is the December regular meeting of the Wyoming Board of Education. We are in session, so may I have a roll call, please?
Mrs. Barger.
Here.
Mr. Buckner.
Here.
Mr. Thomas.
Here.
Mrs. G. Here. Mrs. Aller.
Here.
Thank you.
Thank you. Please join me for the pledge. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
I do not believe we have anyone who has asked to speak this evening, so I'm going to move on to a special presentation on mental wellness. Mr. Weber, you want to introduce or
Yes,
start it off?
Yes, and so I wanted to introduce Dr. Tracy Poitron, our Director of Pupil Services, and I know she'll introduce the team. And again, this is a topic that is critical to student success, not just at the primary level, but all the way through all of our schools. And today we'll get a little bit of a brief snapshot of what some of that work looks like at the primary level, and then future meetings, what we'll do is we'll invite our middle school and our high school teams to speak to what that might look like for some of our older kids. But again, it's this great balance of helping students academically, socially, and emotionally. So with that said, Dr. Poitron.
Well, thanks, Mr. Weber, for having us this evening. We just wanted to take a few minutes to share a little bit about what's happening out at our primary. So I have with me tonight Tina Kirchner, who is our principal. As you know, I hear she's a regular here. And then also Elizabeth Denman, who is our counselor over at our 3 primary schools. So we wanted to just take a little bit of time tonight to share with you what's happening and then frame that within our MTSS system. I think you'll remember about a year or so ago, I came and I shared that piece of information with you. And we wanted to let you know some of the things that have happened, not just academically, but in support of students' mental health and the social emotional pieces. So you'll recall that fun umbrella that I shared about a year or so ago. I'm really talking through what that looks like when we think about intervention tiers and how we help support students, but also that teamwork and professional development and that positive behavior that we bring to the table, all underpinning in that parent support and that school and community collaboration. So if you just take a minute to look at those tiers, that's really where we want to frame that conversation around our social emotional support. So within our tier 1, that's kind of our regular classroom. That's our core. That's like the meaty stuff that we're presenting to every student. In this case, in our primary school. And in this case, when we talk about our social emotional support for kids, it's every student is getting that. And Elizabeth is going to share with us what that looks like at our primary school. Sometimes though, students need just a little bit more, something explicit that supplements what they're learning in their regular classroom. And so again, we'll look to Elizabeth to share some of those things that are happening at our primary. A few students even need just a little bit more, a smidge more practice maybe. Maybe they might need something that is individualized for their learning readiness. And so we call that our tier 3 or our intensive support. And then at times we have students here in our Wyoming schools, as everyone does, that they orbit around that typical core. And they might participate just a little bit, but we know that they need something very specialized and a little bit different. And we call that our replacement tier. And that's about 1% of our population. So just a quick overview. As we apply our MTSS tiers of support to social emotional learning and mental wellness, we really want to remind ourselves that that's the same kind of framework that we use, the same decision criteria we use when we want to talk about academics. We use that same piece when we talk about behavior, when we talk about the opportunity of students to learn the most and the best, right? And then also when we talk about students with that mental wellness and social emotional support. So we think of our tier 1, that green, that goodness of fit for all students. It's high quality classroom curriculum. And that is still our social emotional curriculum, very high quality. We might look at that in the regular classroom in a full group setting, sometimes small group setting, but it's very differentiated based on the grade level or the readiness of the student. And that is, again, true for that mental wellness piece. From there, about that 10%, 15 to 10% of our student population that needs that extra practice, we'll go ahead and move those students, in addition to that great tier 1, that great green zone, we're going to move them on to our yellow piece, and we're going to add to that some interventions that is supplemental. So in addition to, and in our case, and I'll let Elizabeth and Gina talk a little bit more about this, but in our case, it's extending what we're currently teaching so that students have that same vocabulary, that same expectation, like they get to practice it a little bit more, and sometimes practice it in much smaller groups. We do some progress monitoring. Oh, Dr. Whitley, can you go back 1 second? Thank you, ma'am. We do some progress monitoring to see how students are doing in that. And what we're looking at right now with our mental wellness piece is how students are then applying those skills, maybe in that small group, back to their classroom, maybe it's at recess, it's at lunch, it's when there's conflict. And then again, in addition, I don't want to forget that tier 3 piece, where we might be working one-on-one with some students. And again, I'll let Elizabeth share some of those great highlights that are coming up at our primary schools. So now we're ready. All right. Elizabeth, you ready to go?
Absolutely. All right.
You're gonna sit there,
Yeah, I can do that. That works. All right. And like Dr. Quatrin was just saying, looking at our different tiers that we have. So just kind of at a glance, we've already covered, but that green level, that first level of support is prevention for all of our students. And then there's additional support. So when we go to our yellow and when we go to our red zones, that's when we're having more responsive approaches. So looking at the green zone first, that's where we address that social, emotional, and academic behaviors through explicit instruction, which makes it that much of a better preventative measure. In general, what we're doing is we are meeting with classes once a week for 30 minutes. There are times when there's shortened weeks or, holiday parties coming up that we might not meet with every class, but typically it's about once a week. During that class time, we focus on many different skills. So typically what we start off with is we are looking at conflict resolution strategies that empower students to solve small problems on their own. Students learn the difference between big problems and small problems, and how big problems need to be immediately reported to a trusted adult, as a big problem is something that could hurt someone or something could be damaged. It's dangerous, it's harmful, it's scary. So the difference between that big and small. In the classroom setting, we also address and talk about bullying, what it is and what it is not. We talk about everyone's role in preventing bullying and how bullying is not tolerated anywhere. We talk about not just our school, but our homes, our neighborhoods, our communities. Additionally, in the classroom, we help to increase student success by teaching skills for learning, empathy, emotional regulation, and then even some more problem-solving skills later in the school year. Students learn what academic behaviors look like, essentially teaching them how to be a good student and how that maximizes learning. Students also learn what it means to be a good friend, coping skills, and steps that we can use to problem solve. The yellow and red areas, moving on, are offered to students per teacher recommendation and parent input. The yellow area currently is our small group setting. The groups are based on student needs per grade level. Groups meet weekly for 5 to 6 weeks, about 20 to 30 minutes each session. Just to name a few topics, we are currently running groups focusing on friendship, coping skills, growth mindset, and flexible thinking. We are hopeful we can offer groups 3 times a year, so roughly looking at second quarter, third quarter, and fourth quarter. The red area is completed on an individual student basis. School counselors may have touch points with individual students on an as-needed basis. Additionally, we are lucky enough to have a partnership with Best Point, formerly known as the Children's Home, who provides school-based therapy services for more intensive, individualized needs. Students who see a school-based therapist from Best Point continue to receive Tier 1 classroom instruction, so all the way down on the green. Tier 2, if they had already been recommended by a teacher to be in small group, as well as that Tier 3 support through Best Point and or having touch points with the school counselor. We are excited that the primary comprehensive school counseling program continues to grow. In the past, we haven't been able to provide all of these supports as we were running all of the academic MTSS meetings, engaging in multiple duties, and covering classes as needed. This year, we have pulled back on those academic meetings, which you'll be talking about in a minute as well, which has freed up our time to be able to focus on that social, emotional, and academic skills and those pieces that are so essential. As we continue growing our program, we are looking to expand our small group topics offered, again, based on that grade level need. We want to systematically provide communication with parents to help reinforce the carryover of skills and strategies learned, and we want to identify ways to measure the effectiveness of the small groups through the data collection process. So currently, I have a lot of anecdotal evidence of the support of the effectiveness of the groups that we're currently doing right now. For example, I have 2 students who struggled to name a close friend at the beginning of one of our friendship groups. Now they're regularly engaging in play at school, and they've even had a play date. I have another group of students meeting to learn coping skills, and they discovered others have similar feelings, which right then and there just normalized that anxiety and those feelings. These students also began to form a friendship, and they too also play together at recess, knowing that there are other people that feel the same way as them. Lastly, a group of students focusing on how to be fantastic learners have been able to utilize empathy and explore how their actions at school not only affect themselves, but how the behavior impacts their entire class as well as their classmates. So we're very excited to continue growing our counseling program, and that's where we are for right now.
Can I jump in really quickly?
Yeah.
I think it's important, and we weren't really explicit about this, but as students are within the yellow targeted intervention or the intensive individualized intervention, it is our hope, and it's the goal of the program, to then move those students back down as we gradually release some of those supports. So as Elizabeth was sharing their success stories, the reason for meeting with students a few times a month and then fading that out, or meeting with a group of students 5 to 6 weeks and looking at the skills that they've developed, is so that they can apply that back in the regular classroom, but then not have to always have that support, but that they have those strategies within themselves to be better students. And be more engaged and more successful in their learning. So I just wanted to make sure we see it going up often, but we're very intentional about how that comes back down to supporting that student and making sure that student is working really well in the regular classroom. Thank you.
Okay. And so, as Elizabeth was just sharing all of these great changes and all of this great this curriculum that they've been able to provide, she and Mrs. Abs have been doing a fantastic job in classrooms doing those Tier 1 lessons that every single primary student gets to engage in each week. But then on top of that, getting to do those small group lessons, we're hearing the ripple effects of that all over the place. As we're in classrooms, we hear kids talking and using the language that they're using in these lessons. We hear teachers reinforcing that and are just so excited to see the impact that that's having. But in order to get that done, we've had to really be intentional about how we utilize our time and how we utilize our counselors' time. And that means really protecting their time, meaning they can't be running those academic meetings. They can't be running all of those parent meetings and that kind of thing. So Mr. Hicks and I have really stepped in and taken the lead on all of those kinds of interactions to free them up to do that. It's also being really protective of their time in terms of not asking them to sub in classrooms and that kind of thing, and really making this a priority. So I'm really excited that we've been able to do that. So the way we've structured that is, as the principal, I am collaborating with classroom teachers to support any academic needs that arise and walk them through the MTSS process with that. And Mr. Hicks collaborates with classroom teachers for behavioral needs within Tier 1. In the future, we know we still have room to grow with this, and we're really excited and have some long-term goals that we're working toward. And one of those things, first of all, is really figuring out a universal screening tool for social emotional needs, so that we not only kind of go with it based on what we think is happening, but that we have some sort of metric that helps us to know and catch kids that maybe aren't the children that have really overt or obvious needs, but maybe have some of those underlying needs that maybe we're not picking up on necessarily. And then also having some metrics and some data that can help us determine the impact of our small group beyond just that anecdotal piece, but really having something something tangible that we can use to say, here's the impact of what we're doing, and or here's maybe things that we're finding that are working, and here's the data that shows that, or maybe things that maybe we need to take another look at. So those are some hopes that we have, on top of just really continuing to provide professional development to our teachers about how to respond within Tier 1, and really provide PD of all of the great things that Elizabeth and Becky know to do for our kids, getting that out there to our classroom teachers so that they can be providing that in real time when the counselors aren't there in the classroom. So, yeah, so that's kind of our overview, where we are, where we've been, and where we hope to be. So I don't know if there are any questions that you might have, any clarifications.
Can you, I know in the yellow, you said was maybe 5 to 15%. But looking at the things that you do with the coping skills, it seems like, and you kind of spoke to this a little bit, you could really capture and benefit even a larger number of
Ashley, could you turn back to Elizabeth's slide? And I think what's really important in that slide is if we look at the green zone, and we think about second step curriculum for bullying, and our Kelso's choices, as well as our social emotional curriculum, that is evident in our classrooms K through 4 on an ongoing basis. And so students are reviewing that annually, and much more often they're getting that as age appropriate in kindergarten. They're building on those skills all the way through 4th grade. So a lot of that great stuff right there. When I did a little mock interview of our friend Elizabeth, I said, I need to know exactly what you're doing in Tier 2 because I'm really excited about how these groups came about. So using some of that curriculum to pull over to reinforce for a student who needs it more often, or that group who needs it more often. So it's not one or the other. It's starting with that really great regular ed curriculum where every student in all 3 buildings is provided that curriculum every year. And then taking pieces that might need to be reiterated or practiced in a friendship group or a coping group and doing that with those students.
Right,
Yeah.
so some of the elements we're seeing in yellow are covered in green, it's
Yes.
just,
Yes,
Right.
it's a carryover across. So not only do you see it in the green, you see it in the yellow, and you in fact also see it in the red, just depending on what that need is.
And the yellow is, at one point you said just 3 times a year, or?
We're hoping to be able to offer 3 complete sets at 3 different times throughout the year.
Okay.
So one complete set is 5 to 6 weeks for 20 to 30 minutes. Once again, that's primarily based on kind of just age appropriateness. But instead of just saying, oh, we're only going to offer one during the 2nd quarter, we want to be able to say, we offer a set in the 2nd quarter, a set in 3rd, and a set in the 4th. So we want to be able to continue to grow that.
How are you fitting that into the day?
By scheduling, by figuring it all out, yeah, just kind of, we call it kind of the Sudoku of scheduling, and figuring out how that can be, making sure that the students aren't missing specials, that they're not missing that core curriculum and, reading and math, and finding out when that can be. Another change this year is not pulling students from lunch or recess to do a friendship group. That kind of makes sense on one hand, but then how are we applying those skills if we're taking a student from more of that free time? And so we wanted to make sure, these ladies wanted to make sure in that Sudoku puzzle of scheduling that we weren't taking students out of the time when they can practice those skills and being very strategic and when they're coming up, which is why it's 20 to 30 minutes. It's very succinct, get students in there, have this great conversation, and then let's go back to our classroom. Are these the same? I feel like when my kids were in primary, sometimes you get the opportunity of like a divorce group, or like if you were interested in it. Is that a whole separate focus? I thought so. Okay.
Yeah, so when we look at, these are Wyoming developed, Wyoming initiated resources. If we have a group about grieving or divorce or something like that, we will typically partner with Best Point or another organization to bring that in based on need. And that might be happening concurrently. But this is what we really found is so important for our students today at this time. We might come find Elizabeth 2 more cycles from now, and she might say, oh, there's a brand new group that popped up over at Vermont because of X, Y, and Z. And that's what makes this so meaningful to what we're talking about today. It's responding to what students need today instead of deciding what they might need, right? So we're really looking at what students are presenting to us that they need help with that difficulty.
So would topics like dealing with COVID and things like that be covered in some of these discussions, or?
It's not explicitly as of this moment,
Mhm.
but sometimes kind of with some of those coping, as we know, with our kiddos that have anxiety, that is already kind of in the forefront of their mind. And so that might be kind of an arching thing, but not explicitly at this time. One of the things you might remember at the beginning of the year when folks filled out their gateway, there was an accompanying survey a couple days later that said, hey, tell us about your child's experience. Is there anything you want us to know? That went directly to our counselors. And Elizabeth and Becky looked through every one of those responses and said, you know what? I'm going to go have some of that individual read is because of that parent response. And Elizabeth and Becky saying, you know what? We're just going to do a little check-in. We're going to see how this student is coming back to school. Maybe they were a remote learner. Maybe they weren't. But they had an event that happened in the past, 6 months to a year. And we want to make sure they're doing okay. So some of that read is based on that. And then if there was a trend within a grade level or a building, then we might move that into that yellow where there's a group that's having that conversation. So we're using the data we received from parents and that grade input in that way.
Thank you.
I have a question. How do we define bullying? And what is an example of something that we would want to address or stop between kids that is not bullying?
That comes up a lot, all the way from kindergarten through 4th grade. And so when we are talking about bullying, that's when we're explaining to the kids that it is something that's happening over and over and over again. It's not happening once, it's not those sort of things. We also kind of explain that there are different kinds of bullying. A lot of times kids think, oh, they called me a mean name or oh, they hit me. But it's also exclusion, all of those kind of things. So we go through what those look like, what they are, and how we can stop all of those things. And the kids, even now at this point, when we say, is bullying allowed? And they'll say, at our school, no. And they will say, at our homes, no. And to be able to go through that. And we will even have examples of, this was someone being unkind versus this is that continuation of that bullying that's occurring.
Thank you.
Well, thank you all for letting us
Thank you.
do some of this great work.
Thank you. Thank you. We appreciate knowing what's happening, and you say you will follow up with middle and high to keep us informed. That's wonderful. All right, thank you. We are ready for our board committee reports. The Finance Committee just met this evening and had lots of long discussions. So would you like to just update us on
I'd love to.
those items? She would love to.
At every meeting, we take the opportunity to review an internal control document that we call our analytic. And so we looked at the salary portion of the analytic. We just had a recent meeting, just because the way the calendar works. We only have one day to look at, but everything is running on track. We did talk about the completion of the fiscal year 21 audit. So just last Friday, the auditors have completed all their field work and issued the opinion. Proud to report that it was an unmodified opinion. That is the best kind. So that's the kind that we want, a clean opinion, another clean opinion this year. No reportable conditions, no nothing material to report. The report on internal control was clean, and the report on compliance was clean, and no question cost on the schedule of findings. This year, they did add the special education cluster in terms of the federal programming audit. So in addition to everything else that they audit this year, we were subject to the special education cluster for federal programming, and also all of our ESSER funds were subject to the audit. So we got a few extra fund layers this year, in addition to everything that they target in our annual audit every year. So happy to report that. We also talked about the mathematics behind the all-day kindergarten tuition that is on the board agenda tonight for the board's consideration. We do review that every year and do the mathematical analysis of what it costs to run our all-day program in terms of staffing, and then make sure that the tuition that we're charging for that program is sufficient to cover what it costs to run the program. We take in about $375,000 in revenue from that tuition. And that is about $1 million of property tax revenue for us. So good for folks to know that should we, have a conversation about running a future levy, if we didn't charge for all-day kindergarten, that would add at least another $1 million onto anything that we were running just to sustain our current programming. So we reviewed the mathematical calculation for that. We also did an extensive review of all of our stimulus funding. There is a resolution on the agenda tonight to pay a recovery stipend to all of our staff members out of our most recent allocation of federal stimulus money. So we took the opportunity to review all of our stimulus funds and what we've been using those funds for since way back when the pandemic started. I think that's it. Is anything?
Nope.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, the Citizens Advisory Committee has recently had a meeting. Would you like to?
We did. Did you want to? Go ahead. Sure.
Heather wants to say something. Go ahead.
No,
You got it.
we did meet on November 30th. But if you all remember, we're doing some virtual and some in person. So this was virtual. So our role right now for Ilya and myself is more like joining it at the beginning, giving the update, and then everyone's breaking off into their groups so that they can be working on the presentation. So ties into your question, right? The one, just a reminder, is bullying. The other will be standards-based grading practices at the primary level, and then primary facilities. So we're working on those to be making those presentations. And that'll be here before we know it.
Yeah,
Mark?
first one is March, and that's the bullying stuff.
Right? Yeah. Right. Anything else?
No.
Gentlemen.
Good.
Okay.
Nicely done.
Thanks so much.
All right, the Facilities Committee. The Belonging Committee had a community conversations, which I think falls in line with this.
It does. So our superintendent committee, we are scheduling a meeting soon after we get back from break. I think we were connecting on a date for that meeting. I believe the week we get back, or the second week we get back. And really our task is to work through the feedback that came from the community conversation. That was the November 18th community conversation, where we had great feedback. And so we want to make sure that we're able to summarize that in a way that we can get that out to our community, meaning our schools, our staff, and the overall community. And so that will be next steps. Our Belonging and Inclusion Collaborative group is meeting virtually tomorrow, and they'll continue their work on their individual teams.
So they're working on teams. In terms of the conversation, how do you think that will be communicated? Because there was just a tremendous amount of information.
Yeah, what we're trying to do, I think that the big task that we've been working on is looking for themes. And so, organizing that information into themes. And so what are the biggest themes that resonate from the feedback from the overall community conversation? Very powerful. And so we want to make sure that we are acknowledging every bit of feedback and making sure that is appropriately placed into the theme that most resonates with it.
All right, community engagement. Everyone have something they want to share? Go for it.
I'll figure out it. Well, I see there's Debbie Smith there too. Fortissimo to go, where they so many wonderful students
That was fabulous.
participated and
Yes.
played and had different concerts for wire and strings. I think I love the way that it is adapted too, so that you can actually still kind of have it and the kids can participate. And then same, I get to have the opportunity to watch kids then play again at JWC for Light Up. A lot of the students also were performing at different parts of that in the community, which is just great to see that partnership, I think, between what the students are doing and community groups.
How nice of them to give up a Sunday evening too, for the light up. It was great. That was really good. And
And then the concerts are coming up, right? It's a big, busy time.
High school had their concert.
Yeah.
the high school had a concert,
Excellent.
which was
Excellent
excellent.
Amazing.
So many of the wonderful things that,
Middle school have this too,
The strings concert is Wednesday.
right?
Strings is Wednesday.
and
band
band
choir.
is tomorrow.
Oh,
So
wow.
it's busy for that.
Yeah,
And then we were just even saying, I know it's not a, it was community in the sense of, Young Bar rented the Henry Center, but so many of our students perform and dance. So they did the Nutcracker this past weekend too. So just so many different opportunities to see students in the way that they're engaging has been pretty
well,
fun.
this community has a commitment to its arts, fine arts, as well as the musical performing arts, and we honor that.
I heard the middle school production was.
Oh, they had a musical production.
Cute.
Yes, the Holiday Dream was
The drama.
amazing.
It was very cute.
It was very cute. Yeah.
In terms of meetings too, I don't have a PSA update at this time. So I don't know if anyone, for the other meetings that you all are a part of, if one has happened since the last meeting. That was the-
No, it's kind of
It's a
ongoing.
lot of fun upcoming.
I will also share our strategic planning conversations continue. Incredible dialogue, and really we've been talking about what does success look like now and in the future, and really determining or defining success as we continue on. And we do have some opportunities for community feedback that we'll be getting out later on this week, looking at the January 5th and January 6th evenings. Both of those would be community opportunities. We're looking at 7 p.m. Again, we'll share later on this week all the information. We'll continue to get that out. But January 5th and 6th, 7 o'clock, community feedback sessions. And along with this, we believe what we're trying to do is also have an opportunity for people who can't be there to share their thoughts via a survey too. Just want to make sure that we're giving every opportunity we can for people to provide feedback on what's important to students now and in the future. So the 5th and 6th for community. Also on the 6th, we're looking at adding another staff opportunity to meet with our staff specifically. That will be in the afternoon. And then we're also looking on the January 6th date to connect with high school students. Looking to hopefully use their flex opportunity because they all have access to that and they're not having to forego an extracurricular activity after school. So that would be a nice opportunity to get to know what's on the mind of our high school kiddos. Mhm.
In the January window, are they responding to something or reacting to input onto something that's in progress, or just generally open for their?
Wide open.
Okay.
But this would be a time for those specific things you recognize as what makes Wyoming excellent,
Mhm.
to make that known,
Yes, yes.
to bring that information and say so.
Yeah,
I just-
and the goal for this is to bring all that information to the team to grapple with and to utilize that information.
Right.
Yes.
I just know the team has been having some really good conversations around, even thinking about what the past has been, what's present, and then what the future is.
Yes.
In terms of what the pace of change, kind of has been in the last 12 years and what we expect that to be in the next, and how do we, continue with the vision to where we're going as a district, and how we think about the graduate, from Wyoming. So I feel there's a lot of good progress happening, and so I think it's great that we're engaging full community as early in the process. So I'm excited and thankful for that.
And because it happens to the board all the time, the board has to, at a certain point, look at some of those things, and put price tags and
Exactly.
see what can we afford, what can't we afford, and we have to share that with the community too. But this is the time to get those positives out there and
Yes.
talk about what makes us special, what makes us all want to live here.
Right.
Yes.
So we will get to those things. Gosh, that was just community engagement. Okay. All right, so we do have some committees that I don't know that they've actually met per se, but they have ongoing projects. They have ongoing information happening in facilities. I think it might be one of them. I don't know.
Gina
that
is
you-
continuing
yeah.
to support the work of the CAC study team, and I believe that she is organizing a site visit
that, if you all don't have that date yet, it will be coming to you shortly. I think she was finalizing that. We're trying to go look at, some primary facilities to help frame the conversations that we're having.
That's our working committee that would be going to that.
Yep.
Okay,
Yep.
all right, good.
And I'm looking at our committee people.
Okay.
If you don't have that date yet, I think it's coming.
We'll be ready.
All right.
Thank you.
Planning and goal setting.
No, all I was going to respond to was the continue work on the strategic planning.
Right.
And to make sure that folks
Also
knew
an
that we were getting
ongoing-
those dates out.
Okay. Policy review, if you all don't mind, I'd like to hold that back because we're about to look at a new policy first read, and then we've got a lot of second reads to approve. And then student achievement, also ongoing, but not necessarily a meeting per se.
Right.
Correct?
Are we, if we're tapping in DLT with that, you know what I mean? I always kind of put that as an
Sure.
under layer, I guess.
Talk about it, jump in for it.
Okay, the way I see it, it's like student achievement per se, we did not have our separate meeting, but what's helpful to me, and I won't speak for you, Elliot, but is when we have the district leadership team meetings,
Right.
then that's helpful to hear what's happening with that. We got to listen to them review data work happening in the building, strategic planning update, district sub update, so like an under the umbrella, I guess.
One of the things we were talking about is how the schedule sets up and how you might think about the number of days we currently have for instruction and what teacher, it's not teacher in service, but what we might do to, look in the future around adding an additional day, just so that all the data that we're engaging in, folks are saying it'd be helpful to have some time to process that well and engage and put strategies together for how do you act on that, in constructive ways, but also intentionally and proactively. So those are some of the conversations that we were.
Yeah, and I'll speak to that too. So we specifically looked at the 22-23 calendar, which is approved. But we know that we're doing things that we haven't done before. And so we're really, again, digging pretty deeply and understanding and using data to inform instruction. Some of the data that we get from the state specific to growth, student growth, doesn't come to us until November. And so we through conversation, we're hearing how valuable it would be if we had a day around now to look through that additional data in addition to everything that we already have on hand. And so we're looking at that November timeframe for next year to see if there might be an opportunity to focus on the growth in addition to all of the other things that we look at. So I have one more thing for student achievement too.
Yes.
Back to data, we are pulling the student achievement group together sometime in the January, February timeframe, which is when we have a winter benchmark meeting. And so benchmark meetings are, especially for K-8, we're looking at in the fall, the winter, and the spring. And we're trying to identify the growth that our students are having from one benchmark to the next. So after the winter benchmark timeframe, we'd like to take a look at that data and see how well our kids are doing. Now is a very interesting time in following the pandemic, within still the pandemic. And so we just want to really monitor that data as closely as we possibly can. So that group will be meeting, we might not be able to catch it by the next time frame because the benchmark might not be done until after the January meeting, but it'll be soon after that.
Okay, thank you. In the Board of Education report, we have a first read on a policy, and I believe Dr. Whiteley, who tonight is actually our Director of Communications.
Oh.
What a fabulous group. They can take on any.
The policy that you have in front of you tonight to consider is eligibility of resident and non-resident students. And really, there are two changes here. One is just kind of stipulating and providing some more detail and specification around the documents that we take upon initial enrollment so that there is more clarity there. Because sometimes people have questions, so we just wanted to enumerate that. And then on the other, the next page, letter C, which you'll see in green, this part is really coming kind of from the state or our NAOLA guidance. That basically says when a military family is relocated or transferred in, instead of having to wait for some of that paperwork, which might be delayed in that process, that we can go ahead and enroll them like we would any other district resident in our district.
really, that's the nuts and bolts.
And I just now haven't gotten to. Okay, are there any questions? Because the military actually comes in on an additional,
Yep.
policy as well. But, you're also kind of keeping that clean and neat and as we look into the possibility of, resident and non-resident students. All right, thank you. That's a first read. So that means we will have 30 days to look at it. If anybody wants to ask questions, they would probably need to direct to Dr. Whiteley, and then we'll move on then to the following policies. We went over these each individually last time. If you would like to, I would be glad to. I don't know that any questions popped up. So I think at this point, if everyone is okay, we will move on those. Unless they're looking around, no questions. All right. Then I think I'm going to ask you to move on to the appointment of a president pro tem for our organizational meeting. By law. Remember, in January, we have to meet again to set up for the year our officers, our working committees, our dates. So to start that meeting, we need a president pro tem. So may I have a motion to appoint someone to the president pro tem?
I nominate Kara.
Okay, nomination of Kara. I'd like to second that nomination of Kara. At this point, then, we have those standing there, and we'll go on to the approving the Board of Education report, which means in approving the report, you're approving those policies, and you're also approving Kara as the president pro tem for our organizational meeting. Right, so may I have a roll call?
I think I need a motion for the entire report.
Oh, I move that we approve the
Thank you.
business report.
Thank you. May we have a second?
Second,
Thank you. Mr. Buckner,
yes.
Mr. Thomas.
Yes.
Mrs. G.
Yes.
Mrs. Zoller.
Yes.
Mrs. Barker.
Yes.
Thank
All
you.
right, thank you. All right, treasurer's report.
Thanks, Jeannie. Item A, approval of the minutes from the regular meeting on November 22nd and the planning meeting of December 7th. Item B, approval of the statement of revenues and expenditures for November 30th. Item C, appropriation adjustments for the month of December. We just had a couple, they were all student activity related. Item D is the all-day kindergarten tuition. This is not a change from the tuition rate for the current year. And again, we spoke about that in Finance Committee, that tuition rate is set to cover the cost of the personnel for our all-day kindergarten program. And
Just the teachers, correct?
Yeah.
That still does not connect with additional personnel we have in the classroom. Art people, music people.
That is correct.
We still take those out of our general.
That is correct.
Okay.
Yeah. And item B is approval of the report, please.
All right, thank you. May I have a motion
So move that we approve the treasury report.
and a second?
Second.
May I have a roll call?
Mr. Thomas,
Yes.
Mrs. G,
Yes.
Mrs. Zoller,
Yes.
Mrs. Barker.
Yes.
Mr. Buckner.
Yes.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. Superintendent's report.
Okay, thank you. We have a few personnel items. Number one, recommendation to rescind athletic supplemental contract for the 21-22 school year. Number two, a recommendation to approve an athletic supplemental contract within the 21-22 school year. Number three is recommendation to approve these athletic workers for the current year, 21-22. Number four is a recommendation for payment to support work being done to support students, and that's for this year also. Number five and number six are recommendations that actually refer back to last year. Number five is for an athletic worker. Number six is for athletic supplemental contract. And paperwork and forms just recently coming for those, which is why they're being approved now. Item B is a recommendation to approve any change or new course proposals. And these are for the 22-23 school year. And so each year, we go through the process of considering changes or additions to our course program. And you can see we have several that are on the agenda for approval for next year that open up new opportunities for students, which is great. And so I think Ashley was going to give a brief summary of what each one of these would do for students.
So I'll just kind of go in order of what you have on your paper. The first one is AP Music Theory. This would be a brand new addition to a new course at the high school. AP Music Theory or Advanced Placement Music Theory would be the culminating experience for our students who thrive in music and have a music passion. AP Music Theory is an introductory college level course that looks at music theory and understanding behind music theory and analyzing performed and notated music and exploring musical concepts like pitch, rhythm, musical design. So again, just another opportunity for our students to be able to explore music. While certainly that performance aspect is in music, there's also that theoretical aspect as well that we want to give students the opportunity to do. Again, this will be another AP course to add to the repertoire, but also we're really looking at the student experience. Looking at other districts, we always look at other districts and data around us, not only our comparatives, but surrounding. This is a common course in high schools across our region and across the nation. And so that would be an introduction to the course that would be new to the course guide and on the course selection sheet this coming spring. Any questions about that one before
It sounds like a great class. I guess I do need to ask in terms of additional cost.
Currently, there would be no additional cost in that. We did talk about, this is a very specialized course, and we want to make sure that we find that balance of offering and staffing, right, in our music department because we are small. So we are looking at an enrollment of 10 to run this course. So that might mean we have more students sign up for that, but because of schedule changes or things like that, we want to make sure that we do have 10 there. And the music department sits in Mr. Park. And I have talked about some ways about how we can have that class without additional staffing and looking at different entities, there's ways that might be possible.
I was gonna ask who was gonna.
I know.
teach it, but I didn't wanna press.
So that
And doesn't Mr. Pratt said, I feel like 1 million flyers, I don't know the numbers, but I feel like it's real high.
And we talked about some ways, and right now we're beholden to the course numbers that we don't know. We know our past history. So when those course numbers come in, continuing to look at that with open eyes and fresh eyes to try to balance those numbers and make that manageable, but also still hopefully be able to introduce this class at the right time and in the right sequence.
Well, the write-ups too are helpful that you attach to the Friday update.
The next class you will see is financial literacy. This would be a new class at the high school as well. This course proposal is uniquely a little unique in that this is the state requirement. This is a state mandate. Starting with next year's freshmen. It does not mean that freshmen have to take it. But starting with next year's freshmen, sometime in their 4-year span, they have to have half a unit, which is a semester, 60 hours of financial literacy. And that is a graduation requirement. So you will see that our graduation requirement and what we're proposing, and I'll talk about what that means, would be to go from 21 graduation credits to 21.5. Now, the reason we, through discussions with the social studies department and Mr. Stallings and Ms. King, there are 2 ways to kind of tackle this mandate, right? One is to absorb it into a class that we have, right? Having some history at the high school myself, I can tell you that our social studies department has worked very, very hard on the alignment and the sequencing of their curriculum. And so to introduce 60 hours into a course that already exists really, really impacts your curriculum and shifts it around. So we really were not interested in doing that. And I'm just going to give an example. We did not want to take this 10th grade history and basically cut half a year of it out and just call it 10th grade history, right? So instead, we are choosing the path of a standalone kind of elective, almost think like oral comm, right? So our students have 4 years of English, and then they have half a unit of oral credits. That does not count for oral communication. That does not count as their 4 English credits. That's 4 English credits and half a unit of oral comm. So we will have 4 units, 4 credits of social studies, and half a unit of financial literacy. You might wonder, social studies, why does it come in social studies? So currently the state, a little bit different bill, probably 7 years ago, 8 years ago, did require or introduce some financial literacy standards that social studies absorbed, kind of in government was a good place for those to do it.
but there was not a 60-hour requirement, and there was not a standalone curriculum that the state had written. It was just the introduction of some new standards. And like I said, that was easy to absorb in the pockets where they made sense. So the new bill said that basically if you have a social studies license, you have a business license, or you have a family consumer science license, that you are valid and endorsed to teach financial literacy. They also recognize that if you are a math teacher, you could teach financial literacy if you got a special endorsement on your license by the year 23-24, which they have not articulated what that would look like. They have articulated that they would give you some help in paying that. And so because of its current absorption with social studies, they feel very, equipped to teach that. They also understand that this could maybe be a feeder class for AP Micro or AP Macroeconomics for that student. And because we don't want to stipulate to the math department an unknown entity out there that you have to take to be specially licensed or endorsed, it's a validation on their certification. That is why social studies is going to have that kind of standalone elective. So again, for our regular curriculum, as you know, it will stay in place for social studies, 4 credits, and we will have that standalone half credit of financial literacy, starting with next year's freshmen. Talking with the social studies department, they're still finding the sweet spot of when to do that. Probably going to be freshman or sophomore year. That's where we would guess, because of the complexities of junior year and senior year. Your mind is just in a different place, and it's a graduation requirement, and so we don't want that kind of tackled or attached to the senior year. So probably going to either be a freshman or sophomore year, but they will have that finalized by the time the course got into their selection sheet.
Well, it's interesting because you have oral comm as a half,
Mhm.
as a semester course, so it seemed like logical to maybe pair it up.
So we actually have lots of semester courses, right? So we have
Oh,
all of our
yeah.
Archer semester courses, really all of our electives, except for like an AP elective, are a semester course. So the beauty, and good thinking on that, Kara, is it's not always nice to pair something, right? So if we pair it in freshman, if you have freshman year, what is kind of a freshman elective you can put on the other side of it that a student might have for an opportunity, or sophomore year? We also want to make sure that for our counselors, we give them students an opportunity to take something early in case they do need multiple times to take it as a graduation requirement. And also something that a counselor, especially within the graduation pathways, the myriad of options that exist there with SEALs, that counselors have an opportunity for students to take something kind of in a finite period of time, so it's less tracking on their part as well.
So I know this is foolish of me, but I'll ask it anyway. The state is offering us money for the teacher,
They are not.
that's false.
So,
Yeah.
so to answer probably your next question, is there a cost to this? Yes, there is. Could we absorb it? We could, meaning with the current staff that we have 7 teachers. We think to keep the fidelity and integrity of the curriculum that we have, and that the electives that we offer and rotate, social studies department has the most electives in the building. You approved some of them last year, African American studies, women's studies.
Right.
We would potentially be entertaining a new staff member, half a staff member, somewhere in that, depending on the final needs that shake out with course requests.
So when you find yourself in a conversation on unfunded mandates, we now have a good example we can offer.
I'm assuming as they looked at the assessment, they've determined of the many electives in the social studies department, that there are none that are of low subscription or ones that we feel like it's time to perhaps refresh, such that all of those need to be continued. And this additional one means we have to hire someone to.
Yes, and so, and I'm gonna answer that twofold for you. So when you take, you have AP electives, right, like an AP Human Geography or AP Micro Macro, and then you have kind of non-AP electives. All of those are fairly new, really. I mean, within the last 4 to 5 years, we talked about, but even before this was a discussion though, that with 7 people currently, or even 8 people, you do have to look at the rotation for that, right? You have to also revise these curriculum maps to keep them fresh and current. We have Holocaust class, right? That doesn't mean that curriculum stays the same, right? You have to tailor those units to the students sitting in front of you, their passions, their interests around that topic. So yes, I think all of those are very much still relevant, but looking at the rotation of those in a course guide so that we can help students plan when to take them during their 4-year sequence, I think is also very important when you have that elective on the table.
So this course you could take any of the 4 years.
This course will probably be specified during a specific year, more than likely
okay, so-
freshman or sophomore.
Okay, you did say that.
They're grappling with where to put that, right? What's most age appropriate? Could it be used maybe as a transitional course from middle school to high school? Could it be used, again, almost as a feeder program into AP micro and macro, and what does that look like? Also looking at just the curriculum and the standards of each grade level and where to maybe capitalize on that, and also student schedules, right? Where are student schedules really tight as far as requirements or mandates at certain grade levels, and where do they have a little bit more flexibility and room to maybe put that?
Thank you.
The next piece is K through 2 literacy decoding, phonemic awareness, and phonics. This is a change, right? And I don't want to be confused in that it's not a course proposal, right? We're not adding a new course to the primary schedule. Gina might hurt me if we did. Time is of the essence there anyway. This is really just looking at our curricular offering and changing kind of the nature of it. And what do I mean by that is, Gina's talked a lot about, the primary's talked a lot about the importance of decoding and reading, right? And when you talk about decoding, you're looking at phonemic awareness, which is critical in spelling. It's also critical in helping recognize and manipulate the sounds in a word and learn the patterns. But then also phonics instruction, right? And phonics instruction is about decoding their letters and their sounds and blending those and really teaching them that orthographic mapping that they experience so that they become effortless, kind of can pull that memory to kind of read. And so what that means as far as a change to our kind of curriculum scope is that we would look at Words Their Way, which I know you've heard of. We're not abandoning that, but kind of limiting that usage a little bit and really focusing on some more of the more permanent components instead of the student workbooks and some of those online components, but focusing more on those permanent pieces. Then also modifying the way that we introduce or use Lucy Tompkins. Again, not abandoning that, but really looking at a very specific way and how we introduce that into the curriculum. And then really branching out and looking into some other reading materials like that focus on the science of reading. So again, we're not abandoning anything. We're going to take some things that we have in place, like Lucy Tompkins, Voice Their Way, use them more deliberately. And then that science of reading, which ties into that literacy bill for Ohio as well, making sure that we're very specific with the programming to create a decoding, explicit teaching of decoding in our reading. Just trying to be, when you talk about the tiers that you heard about tonight, tier 1, 2, and 3, being proactive in that tier 1, so that all students are really exposed to a very systematic approach to decoding in their reading and their analysis, so that then we see less and less in tier 2 and tier 3.
So we hope that improves or we see some change in terms of literacy, but quite frankly, a second part there is we're looking at some state law changes that we're.
Yeah, there's a literacy
adhering to.
bill, coming down, and it's really about the science of reading, right? And
Right.
making sure that we have those systems in place in a tier 1 and really make sure that we're meeting all students' needs and teaching them ways to pull that out more instantaneously rather than kind of willy-nilly. Gina uses the approach of a system, right? We need a system to our reading on the table to all students.
And how does the Orton-Gillingham requirement fit with that?
And who's Dr. Quattro here? Dr. Quattro, I'm gonna let you speak about Orton-Gillingham.
So we have embraced this idea of multi-syllable and multi-ways in which to teach students reading. So Orton-Gillingham is a framework that we use, and we've had many of our staff members, including our students, or our staff members who are intervention specialists all the way through 12th grade, support that. In addition to this idea of teaching phonics and phonemic awareness within our core, our tier 1, we're also looking at ways to bring in more evidence-based practices. And so while we'll continue to use that Orton-Gillingham approach in some ways, we're going to be very systematic and working very closely to determine what that looks like for K-1-2 students and how that looks and how we support students from 2nd grade on up that might need some more practice in that. And so we're currently looking at that with some guidance from the state.
Right. I think.
And then last but not least, again, a high school course Latin 5. And so before we delve into the specifics, I think it's probably important for us to understand the scope and sequence of what Latin currently looks like. You have Latin 1. Some students take that at the middle school over 2 years, right? Some students take it at the high school. Then you have Latin 2, you have Latin 3, you have Latin 4, and you have AP. That's what we currently have. So Latin 4, or Latin 5, excuse me, Latin 5, think of it going between Latin 4 and AP, okay? What we want to do is we want to introduce a course that allows students to continue their love of Latin and the rigor of Latin outside of the AP curriculum, the AP pressures of the test. They still love Latin and they want to take it, but maybe they don't need the structure of an AP class and the test that goes with that. We actually did a pseudo pilot of this year. And when it was first kind of brought to the table, Mr. Wagenhart felt very strongly that it should go in AP Latin. So AP Latin and Latin 5 were running concurrently. So at the same time.
Like students in the class
Students at the same time. And this is a very small number of students. We're talking max 5. Right now, I think we have like 3, right? And those students came in and said, I want to take Latin, but I don't want to take AP. Can I try this? And after a year of doing this, Mr. Wagenhart, when he wrote the proposal, said, I want to change my answer. He said, I do not want it to go in Latin or AP Latin. I want it to go in Latin 4. So Latin 4 and Latin 5 would be taught together. And it makes sense because Mr. Wagenhart controls that curriculum along with the state standards versus AP, he kind of imposes, and I don't mean that in a negative way, but the AP has a stamp on it that they kind of impose in the curriculum and the streams that you cover. And so being in the same class, what it allows me to do, rather than teaching 2 separate curriculums, which is what was happening in AP, I'm teaching the AP curriculum and I'm teaching Latin 5, I can rather teach one curriculum in Latin 4 with Latin 5 and differentiate that curriculum for the handful of students that I have in there. Mr. Wagenhart and the high school administration are discussing the best way for a student to be able to enroll in Latin 5, whether that's on the course sheet, the course optioning sheet, which might confuse people, as you can imagine, like, oh, who gets to take this, right? Or is it basically that Mr. Wagenhart works with individual students who might meet the needs or how they want to take this class, and then he works with the administration and the counselors to kind of hand those students in when appropriate for ability level and interest. So that will be finalized for the first time. So basically, no new staffing or anything like that or additional costs, but it will be Latin 4 is running with a very small population of Latin 5 within that will have differentiated curriculum. Any questions about that?
Great for sure.
I like I used the V for Latin 5, not like the number 5. Very clever.
He might have been happy with me if I'd done that.
Very clever.
Gosh.
All right,
Okay.
thank you.
Well, I still, so just to continue, item C is a recommendation to approve a resolution authorizing payment of a one-time stipends for extra work responding to the COVID-19 pandemic. And I'd like to speak to this just a little bit. You know, obviously the pandemic has created incredible challenges for our students, our staff, our families, really for everyone. Our entire staff has worked incredibly hard to, in essence, reinvent education over the past 22 months, and that continues on. Our work is not done. We've got a long way to go. As you can see, all the conversation tonight is really addressing individual needs that students have, and so our focus is really to individualize the student experience. And so we will continue to dig deeper and deeper as we move about in this recovery plan. And I think right now it's more important than ever, again, like I said, to individualize the student experience, and that's what our staff is doing in incredible ways. When people are tired, they're still, we're still working through a really tough time. And so this recommendation is really being made to recognize the incredible efforts of our entire staff for what they've done over the past 22 months, but also really to recognize the incredible efforts that still need to be made to help our students continue to grow. And so our staff is working in ways and will continue to work in ways that extend well beyond the typical expectations. And it's important to note that this stipend is paid through the American Recovery Plan, which is federally funded. So that's important to recognize also. But you can see a steady flow of information when our staff is continuing to be intentional and purposeful with what's happening, and it's really targeting individual kids and where they are and how can we move them from wherever they are to a better place and grow. Do you have any questions for me on that?
I think it's a great gesture and acknowledgement of the work.
I just want to say, I think teachers, like from the very beginning of the pandemic, have been a part of the planning, going through it, recovery. Teachers have been asked to do so much, and I think we're all just overwhelmed with how much our teachers have been willing to do for our children. And we all talk to people in other districts, and our teachers were Zooming, working with kids individually, teaching in person, going back and forth between hybrid and in person, and supporting kids along the way. So, it's, a gesture that is, I think, wish there was more, but,
Right.
Definitely, I hope teachers feel acknowledged and recognize that the work continues. So,
I think it's important to say that we want to recognize the teachers for the work they've done, and quite frankly, ongoing. It's not over yet. And the fact that we have had so many situations where we've had to, in a very short time, come up with a plan. And the teachers have always been there, and we want to recognize that.
Yeah, and the problem solving that started day one and continues, through today and will continue tomorrow has just been absolutely amazing. And it's by our entire staff. And I think what I'm so excited about is everyone knows that the work that we do ultimately has to impact students. And so, we talked at the beginning of the year about craft and using, operating within your role as though it were a craft, because ultimately it impacts kids and it impacts one another. They live that every single day in ways, and we never hear about all the ways that happens. So it's great. It's great work and deserves to be recognized for sure.
one teacher told me, asked her how, like reflecting back on the year, how it was, and she said it was a lot like driving in a blizzard. And she said, when you're going through it, you just do in the first 3 days, like maybe it's like, okay, but after you keep driving in a blizzard over the course of, however long, it gets harder. And so thank you all for driving in the blizzard. May the blizzard end.
All right, well, thank you. May I have a motion to approve this very full superintendent's report?
So moved.
And a second, thank you. May I have a roll call?
Mrs. Sheet?
Yes.
Mrs. Zoller?
Decidedly, yes.
Mrs. Frederick?
Yes.
Mr. Buckner?
Yes.
Mr. Thomas?
Yes.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. The superintendent's update.
Okay, I'm still thinking of the blizzard analogy. I like that. That's true. And we are just about done with the first semester. And I feel like when you said that, I'm picturing we're driving through the blizzard, right? And so your hands are tired, you're gripping onto that steering wheel, and soon people will get to rest their hands, which is great. Well-deserved break coming up here soon. But it's been an incredible semester. I say intention and purpose, and I think you can see the steady diet of great work that's happening in all of our buildings. Incredible conversations. This whole mindset of whatever it takes to do what's right for kids has really characterized the first semester. So excited about folks getting some rest and time to be with families. So that's first. Secondly, wanted to speak just a little bit about pandemic and our update. And we had many conversations about masking in particular. And so I wanted to rewind a little bit, kind of walk through where we've been, because we pressed pause for a few different reasons. So I wanted to walk through that again. So first of all, we continue to monitor all data available to us. We look at COVID transmission rates, we look at vaccination rates, we look at the number of cases that we have in our buildings, and we analyze how that looks differently at each building level. We pay attention to guidance, we pay attention to legislative actions that require us to do certain things. So as you know, we met on the 10th and we talked about the possibility of making an adjustment to our masking plan. At the time, the high school surfaced in that conversation as an area where we might be able to make a change. And that was because we had relatively low number of cases. We had very low numbers of student quarantines. We didn't have any evidence of in-school transmission, and vaccination rates were very high. So the access that our students had to the vaccination process was ongoing. And so we were really at that 80+%. Where are we now? We determined that, as we were having that conversation, that we were not going to make a change right away. We had our Washington, D.C. trip for seniors coming up. And so we didn't want anything to impact students' ability to go on that trip. And then shortly after Thanksgiving. So we thought, let's wait until a little bit after Thanksgiving to see what happens. And so right now, we are planning to, with that same mindset, with winter break coming up, we've got exams this week for high school kids. We thought, let's pause one more time and look at a January 10th date for a change in the masking, the universal masking plan. And at that time, what we would do is we'd move from a universal masking plan to a recommended masking plan. It opens up a little bit more flexibility. We're still recommending that individuals wear masks while indoors. The date would be Monday, January 10th. That allows for time between winter break, and we'll come back to school during that first week, universally masked. Then the plan is to send more communication out this week. And Susan's been working on communicating that plan change this week. This is a high school only change. We've talked about K-8. The problem with K-8 is our younger students have not had access to be vaccinated nearly as long as our high school students have been. And so that's a big piece of information. We're continuing to watch our case level data at our younger grades. As we see time go by, we'll be able to better view a time when that change will come. We'll probably look at transmission rates in our county, in addition to case data within the district before a change is made there. So we'll continue to communicate that change again, January 10th, as we always have done in the past. If things change, as we're monitoring the information that we're continuing to look at changes dramatically, there's nothing to say that we can't press pause again and say this isn't the right time to do this, or even go back to a universal masking plan if we need to. It's really always dependent upon what's the impact on our students and our staff, and are they continuing to be safe?
You mentioned in middle school they haven't had access to the vaccine as long. Is there a percentage of students vaccinated that you would tie this to before we would do it in middle school? I'm not recommending it, honestly. I think, I would actually wonder. Yeah, so that's my question.
Sure. I don't have a solid knowledge of what percentage of students are vaccinated. We cannot base a decision on vaccination percentage, and so we can't solely use that information to base our decision. But I don't have a really good handle of numbers. We had always talked about somewhere around that 80% range for our students and staff, and we had talked about herd immunity. So that's the number that we've used.
I was asking because since we can't base it on what the numbers are and what people actually choose, all of the middle school students who have had access to the vaccine well past the time when they would be 2 weeks post vaccination.
Yeah.
And so I'm not sure why we wouldn't be doing it with the middle school also on January 10th, given that I don't know what the trigger is. For a point we'll come back and make a different decision at the middle school.
Yeah, and some of our older students, so there's a difference between some of the older students versus the younger students in terms of when that opportunity is opened up to them. And part of our rationale for looking at our high school students first is their ability to monitor their situation, monitor their environment. And as they come into a room, their ability to look at a room like this and think, I think I'll sit farther apart. They just have more of ability to think about their situation and to create a plan to support whatever their needs are.
Well, don't hear what I'm saying as a push against what you're describing. I actually don't know that adults actually do as well with being in a room and not dealing with the pressure about having a mask on or not. So I don't know, when you talk about the high school students, their ability to monitor the situation, they were gonna avoid having high school students who feel like they should be wearing a mask, choose not to because it's not the thing people are doing anymore. So I'm saying that as a person who experiences it myself, and thinks about how nude I'm feeling when I put my mask on in places where people don't have them on. So I'm just saying, I think at the high school, that's gonna be something that we wanna be connected to. Per our discussion earlier, I don't know what's the way we communicate while we're saying recommended, that we aren't accepting people being teased out of wearing masks, or we're not accepting an experience where people are being pushed or just chided about that just because it's not good, so I don't know what's the way we manage that. I'm not trying to be prescriptive on it. I just think that's gonna be a challenge at the high school and, middle school versus high school. I don't know that 10th graders are so much better at figuring that out than 7th graders necessarily, so.
And that was one of the topics that was discussed as I was meeting with high school staff, that question about how students are going to treat one another. And even in my conversations with seniors, senior lunches, our students bring that up as a concern. And so they've asked for time between when this decision is made so that there can be conversations and expectations set for how do we take care of one another in this kind of a situation, knowing that at some point we'll have to cross that bridge and work through that. But those are all really critical pieces that we'll have to monitor as we make the change. Thank you. Any other questions on that? I will say, Susie, I don't know if you want to give an update on weekly vaccination opportunities that we have. Those will continue.
Absolutely. The schools in the city of Wyoming are partnering to bring Hamilton County each year. We've been doing weekly clinics for the last 4 weeks, and attendance has been great and interest is high. So we will continue those. Currently, we are planning for weekly for the next 5 or 6 weeks that take us to January 18th. So those will continue with a break too, which I'm thrilled about, which really allows some of our students who've been in school or some of our staff members who have been working during those times will have access to it also. And currently it goes, and one of them will be even later in the day. Hamilton County likes to wrap up their clinics by 4 o'clock or 5 o'clock each day. But we have one of those clinics in January will be 3 to 7.
Oh,
So we'll be able to do that later.
we went to one on December 7th, and it was very smooth, it was great, it was.
We've had opportunities to make some adjustments and some improvements that we've learned along the way.
That's great.
There's a lot of people in there.
We have learned how to register for people ourselves, so yes, we're good.
And these are in the Civic Center, correct?
Yeah, these will continue to be in the city.
All right, great. Okay.
To highlight the message.
You sound.
We appreciate the yards, right?
Oh, goodness.
And information about the clinics can be found on the website.
Okay.
And my last update, I just want to speak for a moment on the importance of school safety. The horrific incident from Michigan just reminds us all that really the most important thing we can do is create safe environments for students. And so I just wanted to speak to some of the questions that I've had. Our staff has been trained in ALICE, active shooter training. We have recently, again, this year, at the beginning of the year, partnered with the Wyoming Police Department to review that information and have some pretty deep discussions on the potential for when that happens. How do we respond to that? How do we create situations that provide safety for students? But the safety protocols are important, but we really need to continue to focus on mental wellness, which you heard a little piece about that this morning, for all of our students, and really create environments where our students are exactly what we say, feel valued, feel connected, and feel engaged. so when we speak about mental wellness supports, or we speak about belonging, it really is critical, and it's part of the safety plan for our kids to feel connected and be connected and feel part of a program and feel valued. And so it just highlights the importance of continuing to do the work and continuing to check in on individuals to make sure that everybody's okay. And that goes for students, it goes for the adults too. And so those conversations are happening, but just wanted to make sure that we acknowledge the importance of that work.
Which I appreciate, because I feel like I've been redundant, because I've seen some of you, but just Tim and I have been talking about it, like it's a never-ending stories of this happening. And so like the proactive approaches that we can always be taking, so it's not always reactive, and how much the teachers have to go through, and the students, and I'll start crying every time we talk about lockdowns for them anyway, but to watch that video of the students in that classroom and what they need to do or didn't know to do, and just talking about that to me to be like, how do you know as the teacher that it really is safe? Or do we, I know we might have mentioned it 4 years ago, because I know all these things add an expense too. You know, are we still people barricading the doors versus the door stops that they sell, and those are costs, but just what does that look like for our schools and overall safety, right? The middle schools, 3 floors versus the primaries being one level, and it was just helpful for me to talk about it again, even though my children experience it, for us to really think those through so that we keep this many. Sadly, the fact that we have to do it. But very much so. But I appreciate it, and I know that you all do that and take it very seriously. Hopefully you don't have to ever use it, but anyway. I don't know, that's my point is to just thank you for always proactively looking at it and not just assuming that we're all good because we're a tiny town that it wouldn't happen.
Sure.
Because clearly it happens in all these tiny towns where nobody thinks it's gonna happen.
Right. Oh, no, I look at some of the similarities, and there are things I read about the situation in Michigan, and I think that's us, a smaller school district, but that's us.
But also we were talking about maybe the fact of even the securely or the proactive mental health and wellness, so that we really are on top of, like, if somebody is really struggling, that we are more alert to that and not just pushing it off.
Yeah. And even the efforts that are being made to acknowledge student voice and listen to students, because students are often the ones who are talking to us, and they share their concern about one another. And so making sure our students feel comfortable and have someone that they can reach out to is a really big piece of keeping everyone safe.
The Hope Squad that we initiated, is that only in the high school?
That's high school.
It's high school currently.
All right, thank you.
Sure.
I don't know if anyone has anything else, otherwise we have hit the end. May I have a motion to adjourn? May I have a second? May I have a roll call?
Mrs. Eller,
Yes.
Mrs. Barker,
Yes.
Mr. Buckner,
Yes.
Mr. Thomas,
Yes.
Mrs. Jean.
Yes.
Thank you.
8:24.
Have a restful holiday all.